No way home. Bring on the dancing horses.
Welcome back, Bowl Like a Leopard. Hope you're having a splendid Sunday. And we're going to do another upload today. Not doing as many uploads lately because I think the live streaming gets a little more activity, but we might as well for certain topics. So today I'm going to have to disagree with a person who Anthony Logan, who's a host of his own channel, and I've known for a couple years. Pretty much one of the nicest people I know on YouTube. But I would say that he's dead wrong on the topic of flag burning. So let's watch some of what he's talking about with regards to the flag burning that happened last week in Washington, D.C., and then I'll give my reaction.
Named the Revolutionary Communist Party deciding to burn an American flag in front of the White House. Now, before we even get into it, I got to back up a little bit here to explain what's going on and give you some context to this whole situation. Now, during the July 4th Independence Day festivities, then you had the parade and a few other things going on. This group called RevCom for short, Revolutionary Communist Party, decided to have some kind of protest. They're talking about all these different chants, just weird cultish type stuff, right? One of the members decides to burn a flag. I think he had burned one earlier, and then he burned another one. Now, if you ever been to the White House, you're going to see Secret Service right there. I'm talking about right in front of the outside perimeter where you can't just hop over. You know, you got that fence that Barack Obama made a little bit tall, but that's a different story. That fence is right there, and then it's like some kind of little barrier that's not as tall as the fence. Anyway, Secret Service are right there. So one guy has his flag lit all the way up. It's engulfed in flames. It's a big ball of fire. A Secret Service member comes over to him to get the flag, stomp it out, whatever. The guy throws the flag at the officer as you see on the screen before you. So obviously you can't have something like this go on. They extinguish the flames, the police, Secret Service, or whatever, and then that guy is arrested. And I think some other people in the group were arrested. They were starting all kind of fights. The Proud Boys were there. They were trying to fight the Proud Boys. The Proud Boys were trying to put out the flames. They were trying to be the peacekeepers from what I saw, but that's a different story. It was just a big-time mess started by the Revolutionary Communist Party, a far leftist organization. Now, some would say you should be able to burn the flag, freedom of speech, right? But I think not. I called this situation, unfortunately. I figured it would happen. About 2 weeks ago or more, I think mid-June, it was this whole hubbub on Twitter because people were saying, hey, if you burn the flag, you should go to Gitmo, you should go to the penitentiary or whatever. And I agree with that to a certain extent because I know what comes after the flag burning. I know the kind of behavior that is associated with flag burning, okay? My question to those who thought that I was wrong was, should you be able to burn the flag in front of the White House? And I'll place that on the screen before you. People got kind of quiet. I heard crickets and like, okay, exactly. You don't want to address what's going to happen next. See, I'm a kind of guy, I've been self-employed for a long time, so I know what it's like to be doing a certain thing to prepare for something else down the road. I'm not looking at what's going to happen right now or how it's going to affect me or those that are around me right now. I'm looking at not only the right now, but the future, okay? Today, tomorrow, the day after that, 2 years from now, 10 years from now, how is it going to affect long term? That's how.
Okay, so once again, we've seen what Anthony Brian Logan has had to say, and I want to clarify before I discuss why I disagree with him that I'm not disagreeing with him in order to support RevCom USA. First of all, I could not disagree more with the message and viewpoints of RevCom USA. The Revolutionary Communist Party was formed in the late 60s. They were a Maoist offshoot of other communist movements. And they're basically, like Anthony and other people have said, it's not only him, they are a cult devoted to Bob Avakian in the true Maoist tradition and the true anti-revisionist communist tradition. And this is something that I'm fairly familiar with. A revisionist in communism is technically somebody who believes in the line after 1956 of Soviet leaders like Khrushchev, who said, well, we're going to try to minimize the cults of personality and the concentration of power to one omnipresent dictator. Omnipotent dictator would be the best term for it. And we're going to try to really make this a little more of an effective technocratic state. The anti-revisionists are people like Avakian that say, well, we need somebody who will be doctrinaire and very ruthless in applying the class revolution agenda of communism. We can't have compromise, and we can't have this type of adjustment and corruption of the communist theory in order to, just make things go smoother. Revcom people and people of that type, including, for example, members of Rage Against the Machine, they believe in revolution at all costs. They believe basically that the ends justify the means, whatever happens, because they think that society as it is and as it has been is intrinsically unjust, and they have to go ahead. And you can even see it in, this is from Revcom's biography of Bob Avakian. It says, in Bob Avakian, the chairman of our party, we have the kind of rare and precious leader who does not come along very often, a leader who has given his heart and all his knowledge, skills, and abilities to serve the cause of revolution and the emancipation of humanity. Bob Avakian came alive as a so they just go and rant on and on and on about Bob Avakian. But to tell you the truth, Avakian's been in charge of this group since the late 60s, and what has he accomplished? They've never actually reached any sort of resolution to do anything. They haven't gone and launched an actual war against the government, because if you really look at the group, they are a cult of personality that is dedicated to one thing, Bob Avakian. They're not dedicated to actual revolution. They're dedicated to pulling stunts like what happened at the White House. Now, about flag burning. So flag burning was made into a constitutional right, so to speak, in the same manner that Roe versus Wade did with abortion. In some ways, it's something that was created by a more liberal interpretation of the Constitution. And it says here, Gregory Lee Johnson burned an American flag outside the convention center where the 1984 Republican National Convention was being held in Dallas, Texas. Johnson burned the flag to protest the policies of President Ronald Reagan. He was arrested and charged with violating a Texas statute that prevented the desecration of a venerated object, including the American flag, if such action were likely to incite anger in others. A Texas court tried and convicted Johnson. He appealed, arguing that his actions were symbolic speech protected by the First Amendment. The Supreme Court agreed to hear his case. And the issue is whether flag burning constitutes symbolic speech protected by the First Amendment. And it was ruled as yes, because according to Justice William O. Brennan, so he and the majority, they agreed with Johnson and held that flag burning constitutes a form of, quote, symbolic speech that is protected by the First Amendment. The majority noted that freedom of speech protects actions that society may find very offensive, but society's outrage alone is not justification for suppressing free speech. In particular, the majority noted that the Texas law discriminated upon viewpoint, i.e., although the law punished actions such as flag burning that might arouse anger in others, it specifically exempted from prosecution actions that were respectful of venerated objects, e.g., burning and burying a worn-out flag. The majority said that the government could not discriminate in this matter solely upon one viewpoint. And then you had a dissent from Justice Stevens, which we'll look at in a second, where it says he argued that the flag's unique status as a symbol of national unity outweighed its symbolic speech concerns, and thus the government could lawfully prohibit flag burning. So Justice Stevens was appointed by President Reagan. You also had, by the way, a dissent by Justice Rehnquist, who was even more conservative, or he was the real conservative on the court. And he said that, during that time there were many colonial and regimental flags, talking about the War of 1812, adorned with such symbols as pine trees, beavers, anchors, and rattlesnakes, bearing slogans such as liberty or death, hope, and an appeal to heaven, and don't tread on me. The first distinctive flag of the colonies was the Grand Union flag with 13 stripes and a British flag in the left corner. So then you have, this is Justice Stevens' dissent. And by the way, if a case goes to the Supreme Court, they can use the dissent of a justice in a decision that went against the justice as part of their argument, the people who are trying to overturn the decision. And Stevens said, as the court analyzes this case, it presents the question whether the state of Texas or indeed the federal government has the power to prohibit the public desecration of the American flag. The question is unique in my judgment. Rules that apply to a host of other symbols such as state flags, armbands, or various privately promoted emblems of political or commercial entity are not necessarily controlling. Even if flag burning could be considered just another species of symbolic speech under the logical application of the rules that the court has developed in its interpretation of the First Amendment in other contexts. This case has an intangible dimension that makes those rules inapplicable. A country's flag is a symbol of more than, quote, nationhood and national unity. And then he goes through some sources. It also signifies the ideas that characterize a society that has chosen that emblem, as well as the special history that has animated the growth and power of those ideas. The fleur-de-lis and the tricolor both symbolized nationhood and national unity, but they had vastly different meanings. So that's referring to the old flag of the French Empire under the Bourbon dynasty, which was it had the fleur-de-lis, 3 fleur-de-lis on a white field in blue. And that as opposed to the tricolor, which is the blue, white, and red of the French flag. And of course you have that symbolizes liberty, equality, and fraternity. The message conveyed by some flags, the swastika, for example, may survive long after it has outlived its usefulness as a symbol of regimented unity in a particular nation. So here we're getting to really why I think that this bill or whatever Anthony and Candace Owens and their group are proposing is doomed to failure. It's the same issue that you see with hate crimes law. The issue that Anthony brought up, and you can see that, we'll look at the still frame here. So what really is the crime here? The crime is assaulting a federal agent, assaulting a police officer, assaulting another person. That's already a crime. When you see people committing a crime already, that's what you're talking about when you harm others. But harming other people's views, that's really that really is starting to get into a legal sphere. That's very dangerous. Okay, so the act of burning the flag, as abhorrent as it might be to people who do believe in the Constitution, do believe in what this country is about, the act of burning the flag does cause us certain amounts of anger and, of course, I guess introspection at what this country is coming to. And it's been that way since the flag burning became really a trend back in the 60s and 70s. So, for example, we can take a look at the case of what happened with Rick Monday. So this case actually happened in 1976 at Dodger Stadium, and a couple fans barged onto the field and started to soak the American flag in lighter fluid. And you can see what happens. And the crowd's already booing. So here people are already reacting. And outfielder Rick Monday snatched the flag away. And later, see, there's the announcer's reaction. Later, I remember that Rick Monday, in interviews that I've read from him, he said, well, it's because I've seen too many veterans who talk about how much they sacrifice for the flag. So I don't dispute that people should be able to, defend the flag, try to snatch it away, because the fact of the matter is this: if you're burning the American flag and you're committing another crime, then you should be prosecuted for that crime. Barging onto a baseball field, that's I believe disturbing the peace, and it's disrupting an event. Okay, it's a lawful event. You're not allowed to run onto the field during a public event. You paid a ticket to get into a stadium, and you're not there in order to make yourself the center of attention. So yeah, I think people like this guy who assaulted the Secret Service officer, I think that for sure they should see prison time. But what is the real problem with what Candace Owens and Anthony Brian Logan are proposing? A lot of people I know don't like either of them, and Anthony or Candace, because they seem to think, well, they're basically, showing up for the man, and they're all Blue Lives Matter, and they don't actually care about the black community they come from, and they're actually basically shills for the GOP. And I understand why people would say that, but personally, having spoken to Anthony for the past couple of years, I don't think that he's shilling. I think Anthony really does believe in what he says. He's against the flag burning. He would put people in prison. But from my viewpoint, and this is why I don't link arms with anybody. I don't join with Republicans. I don't join with conservatives. You see me call out people all the time, like Lindsey Graham, like Paul Ryan. And to be honest with you, when they do things that are good, Mitch McConnell, sometimes he does something okay. I say, yeah, that's a good thing, but it doesn't really redeem them in my eyes. The same thing with Dianne Feinstein. If she does something something good, which doesn't really happen very often, I'll say, yeah, Dianne Feinstein's right on this, or Joe Biden, whoever it may be. When you're talking about flag burning, I have to call out Candace Owens and Anthony Logan, and this is really why I think that I can't be a supporter of the Republican Party, or even Turning Points, or Blexit, or any of those organizations that either of them have been affiliated with in the past. And it's very simple. So hate crimes laws are things that are, they've been invented by people who think that you can basically police bad behavior and bad vibes away, that you can make people like each other more by saying, well, the law is going to take care of you. Here's a case in Indiana where they passed a hate crime bill, but it had originally had language that had to do with gender identity in it, where it would have so it originally says makes it an aggravating circumstance for purposes of imposing a criminal sentence that a crime was committed with the intent to harm or intimidate an individual or a group of individuals because of certain perceived or actual characteristics of the individual or group of individuals. It would allow judges to consider a stricter sentence for someone who harms or intimidates a person or group based on a list of protected characteristics, including race, religion, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, or disability. So that was and then the GOP watered down the bill, and it might have been better that they watered down the bill. My argument is that there shouldn't have been a bill to begin with. The hate crimes legislation has the same mentality that Anthony is talking about, which is this, that we can police bad behavior, and then by punishing people who are very unkind to others, we can make them, basically their views become taboo, and we no longer have to deal with them anymore. That's actually the opposite of what's always happened. There have always been obscenity laws. People remember in the 50s, if you're that old, and this is something I read about when I was a kid, there was the Comics Code, which meant that the comics had to be screened by an authority. I forgot I think it was just called the Comics Code Authority. I could be wrong. But if the comics were too sexually suggestive, and this would include, perceived, what do you call them, subliminal messages within the drawings or optical illusions that suggested that there was sexual activity in it, they would be censored. If they had political themes that were a little bit beyond the pale of normal accepted views, they could be censored. There were issues of just religious blasphemy problems that could happen there. So yeah, those were censored by the Comics Code. And eventually I believe it was repealed or overturned by court rulings. And I think that was the right thing to do. And it's the same thing with hate crimes when they say, well, you shouldn't be able to, if you committed a crime, let's say you punch somebody out because they happen to be another race, you should get a harsher sentence because of that motivation. Well, how do you prove that motivation? Sometimes it's easier because maybe there are witnesses that said, oh, I heard him say, the N-word, or I heard them say cracker or whatever. those things should be immaterial. If you've assaulted somebody, you've assaulted someone. The motivation is really immaterial to the crime. That's the philosophy that I grew up with, and maybe I'm living in a more liberal mindset than most of you guys, but I don't think that burning the flag is going to make people less likely to assault police officers, or more or less likely. I don't think a statute against it will do that. And the other thing that he's using, and he says, well, I've been self-employed. I know how things start off, and I know how they end, and I know that one thing leads to another. And he's talking about essentially the same issue as gateway drugs. And he goes on later in the video to talk about how if you legalize pot, you'll end up getting shrooms, and you'll end up getting heroin legalized and all of that. My question is, well, we've had pot illegal for so long, and people still get addicted to harder drugs. When I was in high school, there were a lot of kids who were, really into ecstasy because of the rave culture. They were into, I had a couple friends who were coke addicts. Those drugs are illegal too. So no, I don't believe that this gateway drug mentality is really in keeping with a liberty-minded philosophy. And that's why I can't agree at all with either Owens or Anthony Logan. Because look, those of us that are on the conservative side, we all the time talk about liberty. We talk about freedoms. We talk about the Bill of Rights. This is a Bill of Rights issue. I understand that we are talking about the American flag, and it does possess a symbolic importance to many Americans, especially Americans who had, they lost friends or family in war. But what would be next? Is it going to be illegal to burn the Quran? Is it going to be illegal? I'm talking about legality here. Is it going to be illegal to, distort phrases in the Bible or make, defamatory sculptures or whatever of Jesus, or maybe even insult people in the Torah or things like that? I'm sorry. There's ways people can offend me. There's ways people can take, there's plenty of ways people already do that they say to me directly. They say, oh, you guys deserve to be in ovens and stuff like that. That still is protected speech up until, this is important, up until they threaten you, up until they start to, defame you, maybe commit acts of libel, try to get you attacked by other people, incitement, things like that. Those things are already illegal in our system of law. So yeah, I don't think it's something that I normally like to do, criticize people that I think are in general good, and that I think are honestly, they want to do good for the world, but you have to do it. So sorry, Anthony, I can't agree on the flags, and I think that eventually you'll see that this type of legislation will cause more problems. We don't want to put more people into jails for things that are not really harming other people, that are just harming their feelings. We want to have people live in a society where they want to love the flag, they want to love the country, they want to believe that the legal system functions for everyone the same way. And look, it's not an easy goal to get to. It's very difficult. The wheels of justice, or the gears of justice, turn very, very slowly. And it would be naive of me to say that is an easy task to accomplish. But I'll tell you what, this attitude where we can penalize people into believing things that are similar to what we think, or into abandoning certain beliefs that we think are harmful, isn't going to work. I just got back. I picked up some food, and the clerk was there, and he saw that I'm wearing an Isaiah Thomas shirt, which he made a crack. Oh, Isaiah Thomas, he's a bum. And I was like, yeah, this is kind of strange. I mean, why would a clerk be trash talking my shirt or whatever? Even though, to be honest with you, I used to do that when I was working in food service. I used to say all sorts of stupid stuff. It's a wonder I didn't get fired. And then he clarified. He's like, yeah, he was a horrible GM for the Knicks. And then, yeah, I started, BSing with him and saying, yeah, Knicks fan. And then I see you have a Giants hat over there. And we talked a little, we talked a little about football. And I was a Dallas fan. And, instead of just confronting him and saying, hey, screw you, Mr. Jersey trash or whatever, because, you can always trash talk. I started talking the draft and stuff like that. And it was a congenial discussion. The more you have congenial discussions, the more you'll be able to at least get people to look at your point of view and assess it and maybe find some validity in it. But if you confront people all the time, which is what RevCom does, RevCom tries to shock people and say, our country was never great. Their whole thing is America was never great. That's what they were marching through the Capitol saying. That type of speech will never gain you a lot of adherents, and it hasn't. You can see that's why they failed. And I don't want us to fail the same way. So that's about it. Please like, share, and subscribe. Also subscribe to me on Minds.com and on BitChute and on Subscribestar. All of those are at Jeff Leopard, and you can contribute to me on Subscribestar there. On Gab, it's at Starscream85, and on Parler, at Razor Ray. And I'll talk to you later. Enjoy your Sunday.
Endless and all alone, to the